Hello again, and what is hip? And welcome back to, well, a shirt that has seen better days by far, but I absolutely had to wear this shirt because today I'm going to be showing off my very small, but very important and very nostalgic Nintendo Entertainment System collection. And the NES is a system that, well, as you can see, I'm not super old, I'm 25. But the NES is the system that got me into retro gaming, specifically retro gaming, and I could say RPGs, and actually a lot of gaming in general. And the reason being is when I was growing up, my parents kept all of their old systems, and one of the ones that they had me play all the time was the NES, and this was back in the early 2000s. So the GameCube was out at this point. We had a GameCube. So the two systems that I mainly played were the GameCube and the Nintendo Entertainment System. And I was so drawn to the NES because it was such a different experience than the GameCube. It was something that I couldn't quite explain, but there's something about the NES and the graphics and the gameplay and the control pad and all of that was so satisfying to me that it kept bringing me back to it. And we had other systems as well. We had the N64 and the Super Nintendo, but the NES was the one that drew me to it the most, which was crazy because it had the game library that I was probably the least interested in out of all of them, but I kept coming back to it. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I'll get to that when I come across them later in this video. But let's get started here. So the very first game, first off, these are all games, most of these are games that I've had since I was young, and most of these are actually my parents' games, with a couple of them being mine that I picked up throughout the years, but I haven't picked up too much. The first game we have here is Hoops on the NES, and I got the manual here. Now Hoops was a game that I very much remember putting in every once in a while when I didn't have another game to play. And every time I put it in, I actually ended up having a lot of fun with it. It's basically a very rough, just a basketball game where you're shooting hoops. It's pretty fun for what it is. It's nothing special by any means, but it was a fun little time waster, and I do have a lot of memories playing this when there wasn't anything else to play. And that really was what the NES was for me. You know, if I didn't have anything else to play, I would always go back to the NES and pop in Super Mario or some other game. And one of those games was none other than golf. I absolutely adored golf on the NES. There was something about this game that I just found so incredibly addicting, because I viewed it less as a sports game, but more of a strategy kind of game, where it's like, all right, I'm going to shoot right here and I'm going to shoot right there. But I viewed this more of a strategy game, more so than any other golf game. It's very weird, almost like a board game of sorts. And I remember I found out that a lot of these early golf games, the early NES games, actually, when they brought them over to the United States, they didn't have enough time to get them translated or to make actual American versions of these. So they would port over the Famicom, Japanese versions of these games, and they actually included an adapter so it would run on the American NESs. And this is missing all the screws because I was opening it up looking for that adapter back then. This one was not one of them. But yeah, I absolutely adore golf on the NES, and this was one that I have invested quite a decent amount of time into. Oh boy, so this is Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, of course. This is my parents' original, so incredibly beat up, and I've played this one to death. I've played Super Mario and Duck Hunt, oddly enough, equally. I adored Duck Hunt. We had a CRT back then, of course, and I remember I would always start with Super Mario Brothers, and I would play, for a little bit, and then, of course, I get to the point where I just can't go on anymore because I kept dying. And then I would press the reset button, and I would go straight to Duck Hunt. And I would plug the zapper in and just start shooting away, and I would have such a great time. And then I'd do the thing, of course, where I put the gun right up to the glass and shoot that way, kind of cheating, of course. But I absolutely adored Duck Hunt. It was this was played quite a lot. I'd lend this out to friends as well back then, because I had another friend who actually owned an NES and he didn't have this, so I would lend this out to him. But we'd both play this together. I remember very fondly having friends over, and I was known as the crazy retro kid because I had these retro games back in elementary school and middle school and whatnot, and we'd stay the night and we would play Super Mario Brothers, and it was such a great time. A much simpler time, and I really do have fond memories of Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. But my favorite Mario game of all time, after Super Mario Sunshine, but my favorite 2D Mario game is none other than the infamous Super Mario Brothers 3. Wow! So this was the one game that really did keep me coming back to the NES. I'd be playing my GameCube and I'd get bored of it, or I wouldn't get bored, and then I'd just start thinking in the back of my head, man, I really want to play Super Mario Brothers 3. And so I would hook up the NES. Again, this was back in elementary school, and I'd hook it up, and I remember there was a point where I really didn't know how to hook it up because, you know, the NES used like RF connections, so it was different, not like AV. It was, I guess, a little more complicated than the modern systems at the time, and I'd always have my parents help me do it. But then I started playing this game so much that I just figured out how to do it myself. And so, you know, I'd hook it up and I would play Super Mario Brothers 3, and we had a strategy guide that was I think my mom's from way back when, completely torn up, beat up, and just nasty, and that's because of me. I read that Super Mario Brothers 3 strategy guide from front to back over and over again. And I remember in World 1-1, where you start and there's that white block and you have to crouch for 10 seconds and you fall behind. I found that out through the strategy guide, and I remember being blown away. And that was the first time I really discovered, oh my gosh, these old games have these little hidden secrets and cheat codes and button orders and stuff, and that opened up a door, and I can thank Super Mario Brothers 3 for that. So many fond memories. It's my favorite 2D Mario game of all time, and it's one that I keep coming back to this day, and I absolutely adore it. Another game that I could not figure out really how to play, and I kept dying, like I never made it past the first stage, ever. But I kept replaying it over and over again because I thought the concept was so fun, and that's none other than Bionic Commando. I really loved this game, but I didn't know how to play it. I could not figure out for the life of me how to play this game. But I just remember doing the grappling hook and being able to go into those bases in the buildings and talk on the intercom. I thought that was so cool. I really thought that was the coolest thing because there was nothing like this on the GameCube. Again, another reason why I found myself wanting to hook the NES up and play it. You know, all these experiences that were not brought over in modern times back then. But this was such a fun game, incredibly hard, at least for me back then. Mind you, again, I was in elementary school and I didn't have anybody to talk to about these kind of games. So it was just me figuring this out on my own. And I had a lot of fun with it. Never made it past the first stage, but I had an absolute ball. And I have such fond memories playing this. And it's one of my most played NES games of all time. I've probably spent more hours on the very first beginning stage on this than anybody else has. Because something about swinging around with a grapple hook. One game I didn't like, that was Gauntlet. I did not like Gauntlet. I would always put it in every once in a while, but it kind of creeped me out. I felt uncomfortable playing it, and I think it had to do with the colors, you know, the oranges and the grays and the browns and the blacks, you know. It was just a kind of a weird kind of vibe, and it didn't click with me. I didn't enjoy it, and then there were like ghosts and things around, and that kind of freaked me out, I remember. And I know those 8-bit sprites freaking me out. But yeah, didn't play it too much. I would pop it in every once in a while to try and conquer my fears, but well, to no avail. Another game that I did not like, that is Top Gun. I wanted to like this one, but again, every time I put it in, I don't think I've landed the plane once. I could not figure out how to do it, and I didn't like it. I didn't like Top Gun. But I don't think many people do. The game, anyway. Snake's Revenge is an interesting one. I played this one, and I would pop this in from time to time. But I never got super far, but I did enjoy my time with it. It was kind of cool, that top-down kind of thing. And I remember finding out that that's actually like Metal Gear Solid, or at least I'm pretty sure it's Metal Gear Solid. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I thought it was Metal Gear Solid at the time. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. It was on the NES. I had no idea. But yeah, I don't have too many memories playing this, but I remember enjoying it nonetheless. One that I found an unusual amount of fun in was Super Spike V-Ball. This was such a fun game. I would pop this game in and play it all the time. This would be whenever I just wanted a quick itch. I would put this in, and I'd have a lot of fun playing it. I actually ended up becoming pretty good at it because I played it so often. But I was not a fan of sports games, but I did enjoy the old 8-bit sports games. I really found a lot of fun in them, like this and golf and hoops as well. I found a lot of fun in these. And again, that's one of the reasons that I kept going back to the NES, is I was finding fun and experiences that I could not find on the GameCube. But yeah, I played many hours with this. I think I remember playing this with my mom, maybe some other friends as well back in the day. But a lot of fond memories. Great game. Win, lose, and draw. This game sucks. And it didn't work half the time either. I was also really young, and also probably like stuck in the 80s, you know, topics that I just couldn't relate to. Yeah, never really played it. This was one of my first eBay purchases, and I was underage. I was in elementary school, so I made a fake account, and I would buy eBay gift cards to get around the credit card thing. But this was the very first NES game that I bought on eBay, and I think this was one of the first NES games that I bought with my own money. This is mine, and this is Iron Tank, and I found out about this game through, I think it was Classic Game Room. I could be wrong, but I remember winning this on an auction for like $5 or something on eBay, and I was so excited to get it because I was like, oh, this looks really fun. And it is. It's really fun. It's a great game. I've put many hours into this game, and I've had a lot of fun doing so. It's a very solid, very, very solid game. And this was kind of right in the beginning of my retro collecting interest. This was right at the very beginning, and one of the very first games that I bought because I wanted to start collecting retro games. And that was all the way back in elementary school. Gosh, 15 years ago. It's crazy. So these are my two most recent games I've bought for the NES. And I actually bought both of these Double Jump video games. Yes, at Double Jump video games in Vancouver. So the first one here is Gauntlet 2. And normally I I would not want to get Gauntlet because I didn't like the first Gauntlet. But I wanted this because it actually came with the original box in a rental case. And I think rental copies of games are just so cool and so unique. And it even has part of the manual, and it has some old notes that were scribbled in. But this came, I think, from a Blockbuster, if I'm remembering correctly. And if you look inside, the rental company put their own little instructions in there, which is super cool. And yeah, I bought this primarily for the fact that this was a rental copy. I have played it. I do enjoy it more than the first Gauntlet. I actually did get past the first several stages, and yeah, it's a fun game. I'm not a big fan of the Gauntlet series, but it seems to be a decent little game. I paid $13 for this, which I thought was a very, very good deal. But yeah, Gauntlet 2. Now the last one, and this one is more valuable. It's probably my most valuable NES game, and I use valuable loosely because it's maybe only 50 bucks or something. But that is Silkworm for the NES, and just like Gauntlet 2, this is a rental copy. So it's got that cool rental case, and it's got the original box that's all cut out. And if you look on the inside, for some reason it says Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 3, the Manhattan Project. Not sure why. This one did come from Blockbuster all the way from North Carolina, Gastonia, North Carolina, Franklin Boulevard. Pretty interesting. I have played this and I do enjoy this. It's a side-scrolling shooter where I think you can play as an actual like helicopter and like an ATV kind of thing, and you go shooting things down. This is actually a lot of fun. I paid $25 for this, which is a very, very good deal. And yeah, it's a really, really fun game. And throughout the years, I've kind of forgotten about my love of the Nintendo Entertainment System. But after making these YouTube videos, it's kind of getting me back into it and making me remember why I love the NES so much. And that's because it really did get me into gaming. But probably the most important game, I would say, on the Nintendo Entertainment System that I don't have with me right here. It's back home in Oregon, but I'm heading back there, so I'll insert a clip if I actually do go back and find it. But that is Dragon Warrior, the original Dragon Warrior. This game, and I made a whole video about this. This was my very first YouTube video, actually. I'll insert a link below. But Dragon Warrior is the game that got me into RPGs. It is, I remember so fondly, I would put the game in, and you'd hear the bum ba da 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 dum ba ba da ba 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 bum. You know, the old Dragon Warrior fanfare, the Dragon Quest fanfare that we know and love to this day. And I remember that having such an emotional just impact on me. I remember thinking that was the most epic, the most cool thing I had ever heard. And I played the GameCube and all of that, but I had not gotten that kind of reaction from a soundtrack before. And it made me want to go on an adventure. And I remember playing it, and I never got far. I never got far at all. For those of you that don't know, the original Dragon Warrior is brutally hard. It is a grind fest. You have to grind, you have to level up consistently to get anywhere, and you're gonna die a lot, and there's very little direction. It came with a little instruction manual, kind of strategy guide thing that I would read through to help me get through up to a certain point. But I never made it far, and I'd always start new games. And when I was playing it, I really didn't actually enjoy the game too much. But I loved the idea of it, if that makes any sense. I was in love with the idea of it, and I was in love with the music and the vibe that the game gave off. I just didn't like the actual game, but I tried to. And when I say I tried to, I really did try to. I have started new games in that game so many times. But it was just too hard for me at the time. But recently, the past couple years, I started it again on the Game Boy, on the original Game Boy because it was ported over there. It's a little bit easier, and I fell in love with it. I was having so much fun playing Dragon Warrior, and I credit Dragon Warrior to me is the most important game on the Nintendo Entertainment System for me. Even beating out Super Mario Bros. 3, but Super Mario Bros. 3 is definitely a close second. But I love Dragon Warrior, and Dragon Warrior is why one of the many reasons why I adore the Nintendo Entertainment System, and why I can really say that the Nintendo Entertainment System is one of my most nostalgic systems of all time, even though I wasn't from the 80s or from the 90s. But it's really cool to be able to say that I was lucky enough to have parents who had kept their old gaming systems. And it's really cool to be able to say that I grew up with the Nintendo Entertainment System, even though I'm from a completely different generation. And I'm so incredibly proud to be able to say that. But yeah, there you have it. There's my very small NES collection. As you see, I don't have the Zeldas, I don't have Castlevania. I have Contra, that's also back home, so I'm missing that here, so I'll also include a video, but I loved playing Contra. Such a fun game. It was Contra Super C, and I played that with my friends all the time. And we'd die, and again, never get too far, like many of the games here. These were all very hard for me, but I absolutely adored Super C. But yeah, the NES was a system that really, I would say I have played multiplayer, at least back then. It was the most used system I had for multiplayer. I would invite friends over and we'd play the NES, and they all loved it, which goes to show that the NES in these older games truly are timeless. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Did you guys grow up with the NES? Did you not grow up with the NES? Did you get into it later in life? Or are you just from a completely different era like I am, and you're just finding out about the NES? Let me know in the comments below. I'd absolutely love to talk with you guys about it. But thank you guys so much for sitting through and watching me talk about my Nintendo Entertainment System collection. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.